What if a boy proudly says his dad is a champion, but everyone laughs in his face, including his own teacher? You won't believe what happens next. Watch to the end to feel the power of truth and courage. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The moving truck slowly rolled away from the narrow suburban street, leaving behind only faint tracks on the pale gray asphalt. The Collins family stood silently on the sidewalk, facing their newly renovated home, a modest two-story house with white siding and dark shutters. It looked like every other house on the block. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, and front porches that seemed untouched by life. But what caught 10-year-old Jaden's attention wasn't the eerie uniformity. It was the people. Eyes watching them. Across the street, a middle-aged woman wearing oversized sunglasses had paused while watering her tulips, the hose dangling in her hand. Her eyes scanned the Collins family, lingering on Jaden's dark skin, his thick curls, the basketball shirt he wore, before she looked away and resumed watering, as if nothing had happened. But something had. The message was clear. Others peeked through parted curtains, only to duck away quickly like they had seen something they wished wasn't there. Jaden had moved before. His father's career had them shifting homes more than once, but this time felt different. The air itself was heavier, like it didn't want them there. He felt it seep into his skin, colder than the wind. "You okay, Jaden?" his mother asked softly, placing a warm hand on his shoulder. Jaden nodded, his eyes never leaving the house. "Yeah, Mom." Mr. Collins, standing tall beside them, looked down at his son. His voice was calm but firm. "I know this place doesn't feel right just yet, but we're a family, and we'll always stick together, got it?" Jaden nodded again. "Yeah, I understand." He tried to sound sure, but his voice was thin, and his chest still felt heavy. Inside the house, everything was still packed away in boxes. The scent of fresh paint mixed with lemon cleaner clung to the air. It didn't feel like home yet. It didn't feel like anything. As his parents started unpacking downstairs, Jaden went upstairs and found the smallest bedroom. It had one window that faced the street. From there, he could see the sky, a pale blue stretch that somehow felt unreachable. He sat by the window, legs crossed, arms folded tightly across his chest. He told himself it would get better. He would adapt. He always did. But this time, something in his chest whispered otherwise. The next morning, the same gray sky loomed outside, refusing to brighten. Jaden stood by the window, watching the yellow school bus roll to a stop at the end of the street. Laughter and chatter spilled out from it, even from this distance. He inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. Downstairs, his mother was adjusting the collar of his white shirt. "You'll be fine," she said. "Just be yourself." Jaden tried to smile. "Okay." As soon as he climbed onto the bus, however, the smiles vanished. Dozens of faces turned toward him, some looked away quickly, others just stared. The bus fell quiet for a moment, long enough for Jaden to feel the weight of every single glance. He kept his head down and walked to the very back, sitting alone. Willow Creek Elementary was a plain red brick building, standing at the edge of a perfectly mowed lawn. The American flag flapped lazily in the wind. When Jaden entered the classroom, his new homeroom teacher, Mrs. Blake, stood near the board, adjusting her glasses with a sharp flick of her fingers. She barely looked at him. "This is Jaden Collins," she said with no emotion. "He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Let's help him get settled." Her voice had no warmth, no welcome. It was the kind of tone used when announcing the weather. Jaden waved faintly, but no one waved back. Mrs. Blake pointed to an empty seat by the window. "You can sit next to Colin." Colin was a tall blond boy with a cocky grin and arms folded over his chest. He didn't move much to make space for Jaden, just scooted an inch and looked away. Jaden murmured, "Thanks," but got no reply, only a small exhale of irritation. As the class dragged on, Jaden tried to raise his hand, tried to answer questions, but Mrs. Blake never called on him, not once. It was as if she didn't see him. At one point, he answered a history question aloud, correctly, but all she did was nod slightly and move on. No encouragement, no acknowledgement. Lunchtime was worse. In the cafeteria, Jaden held his lunchbox close and walked down the rows of long tables. Each time he got close to a group, the kids glanced at him, then looked away. No one made room. No one invited him. Finally, he sat alone at the far corner, trying not to let the silence swallow him. The sandwich his mom had packed tasted like cardboard. A few tables over, Colin and his group of friends were laughing loudly. Every so often, Colin would glance at Jaden and whisper something. The others would burst into laughter. Jaden didn't know what they were saying, but he knew it was about him. The looks gave it away. When he got home that afternoon, he was quiet. His mom asked how school went, and he just replied, "It's fine." She looked at him for a long moment, but didn't push. Jaden went up to his room and sat by the window again. He watched the wind stir the trees, watched a bird land on the power line, then fly away. He felt like that bird, except he had no wings. The following days didn't get better. At best, he was ignored. At worst, whispered about. Mrs. Blake still pretended he wasn't there. Colin still smirked every time their eyes met. The weight in Jaden's chest grew heavier. Then, one morning, Mrs. Blake stood at the front of the class with her usual sharp posture. "Next Friday," she said, "is Career Day. Each of you will give a short presentation about your parents' job. Make it meaningful. Show us what your family does." The class erupted in excited chatter. Whispers filled the room. Ideas exchanged. Jaden stayed quiet, but inside, his heart beat a little faster. He knew what he wanted to share. That evening, he dug into one of the unpacked boxes and pulled out an old photo. It showed his father standing in a boxing ring, sweat glistening on his skin, one fist raised in victory. The championship belt was draped over his shoulder. Beside him, a younger Jaden stood, smiling proudly. Jaden placed the photo on his desk and whispered to himself, "They'll see. They'll all see." The next few days, he poured everything into preparing. He wrote and rewrote his speech, choosing his words carefully. He practiced in front of the mirror, imagined standing tall before the class. He would talk about discipline, strength, honor, everything his dad stood for. Each night, he stayed up late, rehearsing. His mother peeked in one night, smiled softly, and asked, "Are you proud of your dad?" Jaden looked up with shining eyes. "Yes. He's not just my hero. He's a hero to a lot of people. He fights with heart. I want everyone to know that." She nodded slowly, but something in her gaze looked worried. 5 days later, the Friday before Career Day, Jaden brought the photo to school, carefully placed in a folder to protect it. During recess, as he reviewed his speech one last time at his desk, Colin approached with 2 friends. "What are you going to say tomorrow?" Colin asked, voice drenched in sarcasm. Jaden looked up calmly. "That my dad's a professional boxer." Colin stared for a second, then burst into laughter. "Seriously? What is this, WWE? You think this is some movie?" The others joined in, laughing louder. Jaden didn't respond. He sat still, fists clenched in his lap. His heart burned, but not from shame, from something stronger. Determination. He watched Colin walk away and promised himself that tomorrow he would stand up tall, no matter what. What he didn't know was that tomorrow would not go the way he hoped. The morning of career day arrived beneath the same pale, unwelcoming sky. But for Jaden, everything felt different. He woke up earlier than usual, too excited to sleep. His mother had ironed his best clothes the night before, dark jeans and a button-up shirt, and laid them neatly over the back of a chair. On the table beside his outfit sat the photo of his father in the boxing ring, along with a replica of his championship belt his dad had given him as a gift. Jaden stared at them both, feeling a strange mixture of pride and nerves buzzing in his chest. Downstairs, his father was already gone. He had an early training session at the gym and promised to be home by dinner. His mother straightened Jaden's collar gently and whispered, "You're going to do great. Just speak from your heart." Jaden nodded, too anxious to speak. He held the folder close to his chest as he stepped out the door, the cold morning air brushing against his cheeks like a warning. On the bus, things felt quieter than usual. Some kids still gave him sideways glances, but Jaden didn't look down this time. He kept his eyes forward, his hand gripping his backpack where the photo and belt were safely tucked away. Today, they would all see who his father really was. Today, he would be heard. The morning passed in a blur. One by one, students stood up in front of the class and talked about their parents. Emma proudly talked about her mom, a dentist, and even showed pictures of a dental chair and shiny tools. Trevor explained his dad's job as a construction engineer, showing blueprints and photos of unfinished buildings. Each presentation was met with polite applause and encouraging nods from Mrs. Blake. Then it was Colin's turn. He strutted to the front with the confidence of someone who already knew he would impress everyone. "My dad," he said, puffing out his chest, "is the most famous football coach in this town. He led our school team to win 3 championships in a row." He showed a photo of his dad holding a trophy, standing proudly in the center of a roaring crowd. The class applauded loudly. Mrs. Blake smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Colin. That was excellent." Colin glanced at Jaden with a smug look as he returned to his seat. Then Mrs. Blake called, "Jaden, you're next." Jaden felt his legs trembling as he stood up, but he forced them to move. He walked to the front, carefully placing the photo and the miniature belt on the desk. The room was quiet. He looked up at the faces staring back at him. Some were curious. Others, like Colin's, already amused. He cleared his throat and began, "My dad is a professional boxer. He has fought in over 50 matches and won 35. He trains every day and travels to compete nationally and internationally. He once fought in Las Vegas, and he even met a former world champion." He picked up the photo and held it up. "This was taken the day he won his biggest match. I was there. That's me next to him." Before he could continue, Colin's laughter erupted from the back of the room. "A boxer? Really?" he said loudly. "What is this? Some kind of fantasy camp?" The class burst into laughter. The sound was sharp, echoing in Jaden's ears like glass shattering. His heart pounded, his hands froze midair. Mrs. Blake didn't laugh, but she didn't stop them either. Instead, she stepped forward, her arms crossed. "Jaden," she said, her voice firm and cold, "this is not the time for made-up stories. We're here to learn about real professions, not daydreams." Jaden blinked, stunned. "But it's true," he whispered. "He really is." Mrs. Blake cut him off. "That's enough. I expect better from you. You may sit down now." The laughter hadn't stopped. It buzzed all around him. He looked around, hoping to find even one face that believed him. There was none. Not even sympathy. Only cold amusement, like he was a joke that kept getting funnier. He picked up the photo and the belt, his hands trembling. The items that once filled him with pride now felt heavy and useless. As he walked back to his seat, he could feel everyone's eyes on him, their laughter still ringing in his ears. Colin smirked as he passed. "Nice story, champ," he whispered. Jaden sat down and stared at his desk. He couldn't hear the next presentation. He couldn't hear anything. His face burned with shame, and his chest felt like it was collapsing inward. He had tried. He had believed in the truth. And still, it wasn't enough. The bell rang, but he didn't move. The classroom emptied around him, students chattering and laughing as they left. He stayed in his seat, silent, his hands clenched in his lap. Finally, he stood up, shoved the photo and belt back into his bag, and walked out alone. At home, he didn't speak much. His mother noticed something was wrong, but he just said, "It went okay." He didn't mention the laughter. He didn't mention the way his heart had shattered. That night, he didn't go to the window. He didn't rehearse any speeches. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the championship photo still in his bag, forgotten. The days that followed were worse than before. Now, he wasn't just the new kid. He was the boxer boy. Colin made sure to say it loud enough for others to hear. "Look, it's the champion of imaginary boxing." Every time his friends laughed harder. Jaden didn't fight back. He walked silently through the halls, his shoulders hunched, his gaze low. In class, Mrs. Blake ignored him completely. She never asked him questions, never called on him. It was as if he had vanished. In the cafeteria, he returned to his corner seat. No one joined him. His sandwich remained untouched. One day, when he opened his locker, a piece of paper fluttered to the floor. It read in messy handwriting, "Why don't you knock us out, boxer boy?" He crumpled it and shoved it deep into his backpack. Even at home, the silence followed him. He no longer practiced speeches in the mirror. He didn't look at the photo. He didn't talk about his dad's matches. He stayed quiet during dinner, staring at his plate. One weekend, Mr. Collins returned from a fight weekend. He found Jaden sitting on the couch, watching the window. The boy looked smaller somehow, like a part of him had curled inward and was hiding. "Hey, champ," his father said, sitting beside him. "How's school?" Jaden hesitated. "It's fine." Mr. Collins narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" Jaden nodded, but his hands were clenched in his lap. His father noticed. Later that evening, after Jaden had gone upstairs, Mr. Collins asked his wife, "Is everything really okay with him?" She looked down, folding the edge of a dish towel. He said his presentation went badly, that some kids laughed, that even the teacher called him a liar. Mr. Collins's jaw tightened, his fists curled slightly. She called him a liar? She nodded, in front of everyone. He didn't speak for a long time. His eyes stared into the distance, dark and unmoving. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but full of weight. "I'll handle it." That night, as Jaden lay in bed, he held the miniature belt close to his chest. It didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like something he had to hide. He wondered how something so true could be so easily dismissed, how one moment of truth could turn into the reason everyone decided he was worth less. He wanted to be proud again, but the laughter kept replaying in his mind over and over. Tomorrow would come, but Jaden didn't know if he'd have the strength to face it again. He closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep, but his heart stayed wide awake in the dark. Monday morning came with an icy silence. The usual rustling in the hallways, the chatter of students, the sound of locker doors slamming, all of it faded into a distant hum in Jaden's ears. He walked through the school like a shadow, unnoticed except for the occasional mocking whisper that slipped out as he passed by. "Hey, champ," someone muttered with a snicker. "Throw any punches today?" Jaden kept walking. His shoulders sagged a little more each day, his steps slower, his eyes duller. He was no longer trying to explain or defend himself. The laughter from career day still echoed in his mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. At home, his silence was no longer something his parents could ignore. That evening, his mother sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his back. "Jaden, talk to me. Please." He stayed quiet for a long time, but then the words came in a flood. The tears came too. "They laughed at me, Mom. They said I was lying. Mrs. Blake called me a liar in front of everyone. I didn't make it up. Dad is a real boxer. Why don't they believe me?" His mother held him tightly, her heart breaking with every sob that escaped his small frame. Just as she whispered calming words into his ear, the front door opened. Mr. Collins stepped into the room, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. He stopped cold when he saw his son crying in his mother's arms. "What happened?" he asked quietly, but his voice carried weight. Mrs. Collins looked at him and spoke softly but firmly. "It's time you knew. At school, during career day, Jaden talked about your career. He was proud. But the teacher and the students, they laughed. The teacher even told him to stop lying. In front of the whole class." Mr. Collins's face changed. The warmth in his eyes turned to steel. He walked over and crouched in front of Jaden, gently wiping his son's tears with a thumb. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I'm proud of you for telling the truth. And now, it's time they learn the truth too." The next few days passed slowly. Jaden avoided eye contact with his classmates, kept his head down, and walked alone. But something had shifted at home. His father spent more time talking to him, asking questions, making plans. One evening, Mr. Collins placed a black folder on the kitchen table. Inside were photos from his matches, articles written about him in national magazines, a copy of his professional contract, and even a letter of recognition from a major sports commission. "We'll go to the parent-teacher meeting together," he said. "I'll bring this. She won't be able to say a word." The night before the meeting, Jaden barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it would be like to see Mrs. Blake again, to face her after everything she had said. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. This time, the truth was coming with him. Friday afternoon arrived under a gray sky. Mr. and Mrs. Collins stepped out of their black car dressed sharply. Mr. Collins wore a dark suit, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Collins wore a simple but elegant navy dress. They entered the school, walking side by side down the hallway. Other parents glanced at them, some out of curiosity, others with the silent recognition that came from instinctively knowing when something serious was about to happen. Mrs. Blake was already seated in the classroom when they arrived. She looked up as the couple entered, her expression unreadable but slightly guarded. "Good afternoon," she said politely, gesturing to the seats in front of her desk. Mr. Collins nodded once and pulled out a chair for his wife. They sat. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence hung heavily between them. "I believe you know why we're here," Mr. Collins said finally, his tone calm but resolute. Mrs. Blake folded her hands. "Yes, I assume this is about career day." Mrs. Collins leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but trembling. "Our son came home devastated. He was laughed at, humiliated, and the worst part is that the person who should have protected him, encouraged him, his teacher, called him a liar." Mrs. Blake adjusted her glasses. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I was only trying to keep the class focused. Sometimes children exaggerate, and I felt his story was too elaborate." Without a word, Mr. Collins opened the folder. He pulled out a glossy photo of himself in the ring, gloves raised, the championship belt around his waist. He laid it on the desk. Then he added the magazine articles, the official contract, the recognition letter. Lastly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out the replica championship belt, the same one Jaden had taken to school. He placed it gently on the table. "This," he said, "is my life. I'm a professional boxer. I've fought across the country, represented this community, and been recognized for my achievements. My son told the truth, and you told him to sit down and rethink his attitude." His voice didn't rise, but it carried the power of years spent in rings, facing opponents without fear. Mrs. Blake's eyes widened slightly as she looked through the documents. Her composure began to crack. I didn't realize," she stammered. "No," Mrs. Collins interrupted, "you didn't, because you didn't even try. You assumed he was lying because he didn't fit your idea of who could be telling the truth." Mrs. Blake looked down at her hands. "You're right," she whispered. "I made a mistake that humiliated our son." Mr. Collins added, his voice low and firm. "He's 10, and you made him feel ashamed for being proud of his father." The silence that followed was longer than before. Mrs. Blake sat motionless. Mr. Collins leaned forward. "We're not here to ruin your career, but we are here for justice. I want you to apologize, not just to us, not just to Jaden. I want you to stand in front of that class and admit you were wrong." Mrs. Blake looked up sharply. "In front of the whole class?" "Yes," Mr. Collins replied, "just as publicly as you humiliated him." Mrs. Blake hesitated. She looked like she wanted to protest, to bargain, but something in Mr. Collins's eyes stopped her. He wasn't angry, he wasn't cruel, but he was absolute. Mrs. Collins stood up. "You owe it to every student in that classroom to show them what it means to admit a mistake, to show them that truth matters, that prejudice isn't acceptable." Mrs. Blake slowly nodded. "You're right," she said. "I will apologize." Mr. Collins gathered the documents and stood up. "Good. Then we'll be in the classroom Monday morning." As they turned to leave, Mrs. Collins paused at the door. She looked back at Mrs. Blake. "Tell me something honestly. If Jaden had been a white boy, would you have believed him?" Mrs. Blake opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes dropped to the table, and she said nothing. "That's what I thought," Mrs. Collins said quietly, then walked out, the door clicking softly behind her. That night, Jaden sat on the couch while his parents told him what had happened. He listened with wide eyes, barely blinking. When his father said that Mrs. Blake had agreed to apologize, Jaden's mouth fell open. "She's really going to do it?" "Yes," Mr. Collins said, "because she has to, because it's right." Jaden looked down at his hands. Then he slowly smiled. Not a big smile, but the kind that comes from something broken starting to mend. He didn't say it out loud, but in that moment, something inside him began to believe again. Monday morning arrived with a heavy quiet that hung over the classroom like a curtain waiting to be drawn. The usual buzzing of voices was muted, as if every student sensed that something was different. Jaden sat at his desk, his fingers curled around the edge of his chair, his heart beating in quick, shallow thumps. He didn't know what exactly would happen, only that his parents had promised he wouldn't have to carry the weight of shame anymore. He had tried to believe them. He wanted to. But part of him still expected the day to unfold like the others, with silence, with stares, with laughter that wasn't kind. The classroom door opened, and Mrs. Blake stepped in, but she didn't carry the usual cold authority she wore like armor. Her face was pale, her eyes uncertain. She placed her folder on the desk, cleared her throat, and looked at the class. No one was speaking. Even Colin was quiet. "Before we begin today's lesson," Mrs. Blake said, "I have something important to say." Her voice trembled slightly. Everyone turned their heads. Some students exchanged quick glances. Jaden stared straight ahead, trying to steady his breathing. "Last week, during career day, one of your classmates, Jaden, presented on his father's profession," she began. "I made a serious mistake that day. I doubted him. I called him a liar in front of all of you. That was wrong." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. Jaden was telling the truth. His father's a professional boxer, a decorated, nationally recognized athlete. I judged him unfairly, and I embarrassed him for something he had every right to be proud of. I want to say, in front of all of you, Jaden, I'm sorry. For a moment, the room was completely still. Jaden could feel every eye on him, but this time they didn't feel sharp or mocking. He looked at Mrs. Blake, saw the sincerity in her expression. Then the classroom door opened again. Mr. Collins walked in, dressed in a black suit that fit him like a second skin. He carried a calm intensity in his posture that silenced the room without a single word. A golden championship pin glinted on his lapel, subtle but impossible to miss. His eyes scanned the room, resting briefly on Colin, then Mrs. Blake, then finally on Jaden. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Jaden's father. I want to thank Mrs. Blake for having the courage to admit her mistake. That takes strength. But I'm here for something more. I want to talk to you about truth and why it matters." He stepped forward, his voice firm but calm, every word landing with weight. "Jaden's father is a boxer. That's my job. But my responsibility, above all else, is to teach my son to stand tall and speak the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when people doubt him." He turned to the class. "Some of you laughed. Some of you called him names. Some of you looked away. I'm not here to scold you. I'm here to help you see how powerful your words are. You see, when you mock someone for telling the truth, you're not just hurting them. You're telling them that who they are isn't enough." Mr. Collins placed a hand gently on Jaden's shoulder. "But my son is enough. He's brave. He's honest. And I am proud of him. You should be too." There was a beat of silence. Then a single pair of hands clapped, then another, then more. Soon the entire class was applauding, not politely, but sincerely. Jaden's heart surged. For the first time since he'd come to this school, the weight in his chest began to lift. Mr. Collins looked at the class again. "Now, I want to ask you all something. How many of you believed Jaden couldn't be telling the truth just because of how he looks? Because he's different?" His voice was quiet now, but it reached into the corners of the room like a spotlight. That's called prejudice. It's invisible, but it's dangerous, and it hurts more than a punch ever could. Colin shifted in his seat. His face was red, his eyes cast downward. After a moment, he slowly raised his hand. "I did," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I didn't believe him. And I made fun of him. I was wrong." The room was silent again. Mr. Collins nodded. "Thank you for being honest. That's how we get better. Not by being perfect, but by admitting when we've messed up and choosing to do better." Mrs. Blake took a small step forward, her voice softer now. "I've spoken with the school principal, and with Jaden's help, we're starting a new club, one that celebrates strength, respect, and truth. It's called the Champions Club. Jaden will be leading it." Eyes widened. Students began whispering. Colin leaned forward, visibly surprised. "Jaden? He's going to lead a club?" Jaden looked around at the class, uncertain. Then he saw Colin stand up and walk over to his desk. He stopped in front of him and held out a hand. "I was a jerk," Colin said, "but I'd really like to join your club. Maybe you could teach me a thing or two." Jaden blinked. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook Colin's hand. "Yeah, sure. That'd be cool." The bell rang, but no one moved for a moment. As students finally began to file out of the room, Jaden walked with his head high. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't ignored. He was seen. The following week, the Champions Club held its first meeting. More than a dozen students showed up. They talked about courage, about standing up for the truth, about how to support one another. Mrs. Blake sat in the back, listening, smiling. Jaden stood at the front, confident and calm, sharing stories from his father's career. Lessons about discipline, perseverance, and heart. Colin sat in the front row, nodding, raising his hand, even volunteering to help with the next session. Jaden had become more than just a student in the background. He was now a leader, and he had earned it. On the last day of the semester, the school held a special assembly. Mrs. Blake took the microphone and said, "Today, I want to honor one of our students, not just for his honesty, but for his strength, his leadership, and the lesson he's taught us all. Please welcome Jaden Collins." The gym erupted in applause as Jaden walked to the stage. He took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and said, "When I first came here, I didn't think I'd ever fit in, but I've learned something really important. Don't ever be afraid to be proud of who you are. Don't let someone else decide your worth." He looked at his classmates, at Colin, at Mrs. Blake, and finally at his parents in the crowd.